Hey guys, we are back with some more cinematic B-roll and how I like to shoot and edit it. Thank you so much for watching the last video. You guys commented saying that you want to see more. So I actually want to go over probably the most complicated process in all this cinematic B-roll stuff, and that is the editing. You can take a look at what it took for me to edit this video in Final Cut Pro. Just take a look at all the different elements that were involved in making this cinematic B-roll cut. Now, to be honest, I did take a lot of inspiration from other YouTubers like Daniel Schiffer, but mainly from James Matthews, because he has that cinematic touch when he puts his hands on the camera and he does that handheld B-roll type stuff. He really does some interesting stuff with his camera work. Now, on top of all that, I did add my own little flair, my own little touch, and I'll tell you what is a little bit different in my editing process compared to anybody else's. So here we are in Final Cut Pro. Again, as I mentioned, we have a lot of different elements here. Mainly what is the most terrifying part of editing, believe it or not, is adding the sound design. So sound effects, all the whooshes, all the separate little different things of the lemon being squeezed and just the knives being used and all that stuff. So that was actually very tricky to find, because not only do you have to find that sound effect, but you have to make sure that sound effect actually fits with the whole tone of the video. There's a billion different types of sound effects for, let's say, a knife being sharpened. So you have to find that perfect one. On top of the sound effects, there's a lot of different other elements too, such as the cuts and matching it to the right music, and then also adding in all the transitional elements such as the wipes, the booms, and just the masking. And if you don't know what a mask is, I do strongly suggest that you check out some of my earlier videos right here where I teach you exactly what a mask is and what it can help you do. So let's take a closer look at my project here. Here we are in Final Cut Pro. Let me just zoom out right here. And you can actually see all the little bits and pieces that were needed to create this piece. So if we start off the video, I'm gonna be going frame by frame. Now, I shot this with me going out of my comfort zone. So instead of me being very static handheld with the camera, I did a lot of flips, I did a lot of turns. And even though I didn't really know what this was gonna look like in editing, I still did it, and I think it came out pretty clean. So when you're shooting this type of B-roll, really let loose. And I mean that literally. Let your body loose. Let the camera flow in the air, and you'll be surprised how good these shots come out. Now, this whole video was shot in 120 frames per second, simply because I knew that it was gonna be in slow-mo and speed ramped a lot within this project timeline. So as you can see here, we start off with a turn. I added a little bit of motion blur right here at the top. You can see that right here. And actually, let me enable the blade speed so you can see how my speed ramping looks. So basically, if I zoom in right here, you can see that the speed ramp is at 155%. And then it actually slows down to 124%, and then we go into slow-mo. So you can see that right there. Now, here we go, slow-mo, 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 and then we are starting to approach another speed ramp. As you can see here, this in blue right here is set to 200%. And at this speed ramp, I again added a little bit of motion blur, and also I added a mask. And this mask you can actually see right here. You see this red line? That is a mask. And what I did is I speed ramped that clip to 200%, so that way we get a very clean wipe effect and that mask becomes extremely seamless. Now again, I do suggest that you check out some of my earlier tutorials. I'll link them right here, and it will teach you exactly how to mask properly, so that way you can create this really smooth transition, as you can see here, this soft edging here. And if it's speed ramped and motion blurred, it's extremely seamless. You can't tell that it's actually a cut. Now, if you're familiar with masking, you'll know that you'll have to mask a certain clip and then place another clip right below it. That way you don't have any black screen anywhere. So as you can see here, we have two clips playing here at the same exact time, one with the stakes and then one with the previous clip right here at the top. So as we keep playing the footage, we are actually at, again, slow-mo, 20%. So we are shooting at 120 frames per second. This is all slow-mo. And here we go, going into the next clip right here, which is just a simple cross dissolve. And cross dissolves are really overlooked, believe it or not. It's still relevant. It still should be used because it adds that just simplicity to your videos. And sometimes hard cuts or wipe transitions aren't the way to go. Crossfades are still very important to use. As you can see right here, I added a little bit of motion blur. And we are going into, again, a slow-mo clip at 20% speed. As I play this clip, you can actually see that it's just me rolling out of the shot. So I'm actually taking the camera and just playing around with the roll axis and just pushing out. Now, as we keep going forward, we're approaching another speed ramp at 200%. And as that speed ramp is happening, we're actually approaching another masked transition. So as I go frame by frame, you can see the mask right here. The next clip starts off immediately, and again, we are back to slow-mo, but this time at 80%, which is basically real time when playing back at 24 frames per second. Now, I do strongly suggest that you check out this video right here because that video will teach you exactly what you need to know when editing with different frame rates within a 24 frames per second timeline. So definitely check out that video right there. Now we're continuing on with this edit. This is just basic slow-mo. Now, when I shot this, I actually had the camera moving around. James Matthews taught me that. And we actually did it with Brian and Kitty from Matola Visuals. We shot a cooking B-roll sequence with them. And James was actually messing around with the camera, you know, bobbling it around as the knife was being sharpened. So I kind of stole that shot from him because I really liked it. And what's really beautiful about this shot is that it actually has natural motion blur. And that's really good because that's gonna help us out with our next transition. So as we scroll forward here, we can actually see the next transition take place. As I move the camera up, we have a little bit of blur happening here, but I also added a little bit of my own motion blur. So we get natural motion blur and we get an added motion blur. So that just helps us out with this cut right here, which is actually not a mask. And I'll show you what this cut is going to look like. So I'm gonna re-enable my motion blur. And what I did in Final Cut was that I created a compound clip. And basically what I did, I combined two clips, I stacked them right on top of each other. So let me open up this clip and I'll show you what it looks like. So here are my two clips. As you can see here, they're stacked right on top of each other. Now, why did I do that? Well, if you combine these two clips and stack them up and make them a compound clip, you can actually keyframe an animation of a simulated boom up. So that's exactly what I did. So if I actually show you the animation that I did here by going to show video animation, I keyframed the transform. So if we take a look right here, and as I scroll through the footage, you can actually see the keyframes and the overall animation of the clip. So take a look at the effects panel here as I pass through each keyframe. You can see how the transform is changing on the y-axis. That is because I'm actually transitioning, I'm keyframing the compound clip to go from low to high, which is from the bottom clip to the higher clip. And I just was able to create a very smooth transition. So that's another really good technique to create artificial boom ups or tilt downs or whatever you like, really. And I will make a separate tutorial just on this effect because there's so many different things that you can do. You can do wipes, you can do pans, you can do booms, you can do literally whatever you want. So I'll make a separate transition tutorial just on this effect because it is so, so powerful. So let's go back to watching the rest of this edit. Now we are actually still at 20% slow-mo. All right, this is still 20% slow-mo, even though it says 100 here if I do the blade speed. But don't forget that this is a compound clip, so these clips are actually 20% played back. All right, so here we go. And then now we're approaching the next transition. So I'm gonna go keyframe by keyframe here. Now this is actually a very unique transition. What I did was, when I shot this, I really didn't know how this video was gonna look like. So there was actually a lot of mistakes that I did in shooting that I fixed in my editing. So what I did is that I masked out the next shot. And what I did, I masked out just the lime and the cutting board. And while this was happening, I actually made it pop up from the bottom of the screen. So this is another little animation that I did. So if I show the video animation to you guys, you can actually see the keyframes of the clip rising up. And then if I go keyframe by keyframe, the original clip of that lime and cutting board go into play. So you can easily see right here what happens with the lime. And yes, the masking of this was very difficult. It took me a good half an hour just for this little clip to be masked. But it pops in on its own, spins a few times, and then you can see the next clip just immediately pops in. So I took the portion of that clip, masked it, and then eventually the original clip comes back. And this all has to do with proper timing. And honestly, this was probably the trickiest part of the whole video. So masking is a very, very powerful tool in Final Cut and Premiere. So people really overlook masks. So definitely consider masks in a lot of your transitions. And then as the original clip starts appearing, we are at a 200% speed ramp and then going down to 20%. Now it's very important to understand that whenever I have a fast speed ramp, I add artificial motion blur just because it blends the clip better. All right, so going on to the next transition here, we actually have a little bit of a zoom. So I'm actually rotating and zooming at the same exact time. So let me show you the animation behind this. Now, because I didn't shoot this video the best way I could have, I had to do a lot of transitions within editing. So I knew that a zoom transition would actually help me out. And all I really did was I just zoomed in artificially using a keyframe, and I added a little bit of a rotation. So if I highlight this clip, you can actually see what's going on as I go keyframe by keyframe. You can see the rotation, and yeah, it's just so quick but effective. And then I added, of course, that motion blur along with that speed ramp, and then the next clip of the line being squeezed is right here. Now this was all done in manual focus, but because this clip was so fast, you can't really tell that it's out of focus, but believe it or not, it's out of focus. But I added that motion blur, I added that speed ramp, and you can't tell. So the squeeze happens, and we're gonna go over sound effects after the main editing portion of this video, don't forget. The squeeze happens, I rotate the camera naturally in the actual shoot, and then we're going into our next transition here, which is just a simple crossfade, nothing special here. And ironically, the lemon drops or the lime drops matched with the blue bowl. So it actually, so this drop right here was kind of a bluish tint, and it just really matched with the blue bowl. Now, if you really want to go crazy with your editing, this is something I wish I've done in the edit. I would have masked a little hole in this drop right here, and I would have had a push in into that drop, and that would push me into my next shot, which is this bowl. Now, I'll remember to do that in my next video, but if you really want to go nuts, that would show some crazy skill in your edits. So this drop right here could have definitely been masked out, and I could have had some fun with it. So that's something I'll keep in mind for my next shoot. But going on to the next clip here, it's just me sliding out of a blue bowl. We are playing this back at 80%, which is real time for 120 frames per second at a 24 frames per second timeline. So that's just playing, 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 simple shot. Here comes our next transition. Now what this is another wipe. So we have a mask right here. Very simple, again, speed ramped, and it has motion blur. So keyframe by keyframe, And then we have this shot right here, which is played back at 20% speed. We're adding some motion blur right now, and this is a hard cut. So what made this cut actually kind of seamless, even though it was a hard cut, was one, the motion blur, and two, is that we saw the knife and the garlic and the cutting board in the previous shot, and the next shot has those same subjects in it. So that just made my life a little bit easier while using a hard cut. So hard cuts definitely should still be used, and believe it or not, they can become seamless if you know how to edit and if you know how to shoot. Again, I shot this video completely wrong. If I would have shot it properly, my editing time probably could have been cut in half. But don't forget that if you practice how to edit and the better you get, you can fix a lot of your mistakes that you made in filming. Again, more speed ramping. You know, we have a 400% speed ramp with motion blur, and then we're going back into another compound clip, and I'm going to show you how this compound clip is affected. We have motion blur right here. Now this is, again, this is a wipe transition while using a compound clip. So similar to our last compound clip, if I double click on this, you can see that there's two clips side by side, and all I did was I added a keyframe on the compound clip, and you can see right here those two keyframes, and all I did was I changed the x-axis going from one clip to the next. So keyframe by keyframe, you can see the little animation and you can see the values here change as I go frame by frame. All right, so the video continues to play, and here comes our next transition, which is just a simple zoom, believe it or not, a zoom transition with motion blur. So we have this little foil dish thing here, I don't know, a pan, I guess, and believe it or not, I used that as my transition because the next shot also has that pan in it. So all I really did was I added an artificial zoom that's speed ramped and has motion blur on it. And what I did, I zoomed in on the white part of that foil, and on the next clip, I zoomed out of that white part on the foil. So that's how I created that seamless transition. I used color. No masking, no wipes, no nothing. Just speed ramping and zooming in on that same color that I knew would be in both clips. And now we're going back to 20% speed, just a simple slide, and here comes our next transition, which is just a simple mask and a wipe. We've seen those before already in this video. Keyframe by keyframe, nothing special here. Hard cut, nothing wrong with that. This is a continuity cut. He's preparing the asparagus here. And boom, just very simple stuff here, guys. Now in this next transition, I made a really big mistake when filming it. Usually I like to have foreground enter and leave the frame completely, but in this shot, I already had the foreground sticking into the frame in the beginning of the clip. So I had to actually mask out a part of that coffee cup. But I'm gonna make a full tutorial on this because this is actually a very big mistake that a lot of people make, including me. And I'll show you how to fix this in editing in another tutorial. Just make sure you leave a like and a comment and let me know that you wanna see this. All right, so we're playing everything back down to 20%. I just followed the fruits or the veggies that he was tossing over, along with a little bit of a sound effect, which I'll show you later. And then we're coming up to our next transition here with motion blur, which is just a hard cut, and that motion blur just makes it seamless. Now this shot is really clean, even though it's a hard cut, because I'm going in the same direction with the camera in both shots. So I'm actually sliding the camera right in both shots, added that speed ramp and motion blur, hard cut, you can't really tell. It blended in really nicely. All right, so we're back to 20%, coming up to our next shot here, which is another compound clip. And all it is, guys, is an artificial boom down shot. All right, we already covered this earlier in the video with motion blur. You see how seamless this cut is right here? Look at that, very seamless. It's blended into the second clip very easily. All right, so that's done at 20% speed. Here's our next transition right here, which is again a wipe. Now you can see here I didn't do that great of a job with the mask. It's very hard cut here, but because it's so quick, it's unnoticeable when played back in real time. So I'm actually finding my own little editing mistakes as I go over this with you guys. All right, so this is a 200% speed ramp with motion blur. Going on to the next clip here. The celery is being chopped, or no, that's onion. I don't know my veggies. I don't really know how to cook. So yeah, so I asked the chef if he could roll those right into the camera, and he did flawlessly. So that was really cool. And then here we go into our next transition right here, which is another cool masking transition. And this is actually similar to the line clip that I showed you earlier on. I actually have two masks here. I have the chef masked out right here, and I have this little hole right here masked just so we can see the previous clip, so it looks more real. And because this is such a quick shot with motion blur at 200% speed ramp, it's unnoticeable. You can see that both these clips are stacked on top of each other. You have the chef's arm right here, and then you have the chef's arm right here from the previous shot. So overlaying these shots on top of each other while using a mask is just a really cool effect. All right, so then we have that speed ramp, that motion blur. All right, so here's our next transition coming up. This is just a simple wipe, and this is a mask as well. And believe it or not, guys, I did not do a good job of masking this either. You see how we have all of this weirdness? We should just mask it at a straight edge. So I should have masked it right here. So let's enable this mask, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. I'm gonna zoom out here at 25%. Let's see what this mask looks like here. All right, so playing it back. What I should have done is, instead of having this weird brick wall, I should have just had the mask like that. You see the difference? And that would have made such a better shot. See how much cleaner it is? Because that gray blends in with this gray, and that just makes it better. I should have caught this in editing. I don't know why I didn't notice it before, but we don't want to see any of this weird discolored like brick here. So making a clean mask, guys, is very important, and to have it fill up the whole frame diagonally on that straight edge. You don't want the mask to look like that. It's just not going to be clean. So that's just my preference, my 2 cents on this, guys, and I made a few mistakes that I'm disclosing to you right now, so hopefully you won't make those in your edits. So here comes our next transition, and all it is a little flame burst that I composited and overlaid onto this clip right here, and that's it. It's actually a hard cut between these two clips with just a simple flame that's bursting. So why did I use a flame? Well, we're actually transitioning to the grilling part of this video, so that flame kind of pops out at you, at the audience, and you can really feel the heat, if you know what I'm saying. So that's why I wanted to use that. All right, so let's keep playing it. Again, another simple wipe with a speed ramp. Back to 20% slow-mo. Here's another transition right here. Again, just a simple wipe with foreground. And we have motion blur and a speed ramp. Back to slow-mo at 20%. And then another crossfade or cross dissolve with speed ramping at 400% and motion blur. And then we're back to 20% slow-mo. And then another compound clip with an artificial boom up. And of course, motion blur, my favorite. And a speed ramp, cross dissolve. And this transition right here is another wipe. And again, I use the edges of the countertop to help me out with this wipe because I mask out the edges. And that just creates a better and smoother and much more seamless transition. But then a little quick speed ramp, slow-mo at 20%. Little speed ramp right there with motion blur, and we end the shot with that. So when it comes down to sound design, guys, basically I used Epidemic Sound. They have a ton of different sound effects that you can download. I'll leave a link to Epidemic Sound down below because they have a ton of sound effects. These are all Epidemic sounds. They have a lot of whooshes, a lot of actual sound effects of knives and things being cut, so it's really relevant to this video. And I added these whooshes to make my transitions even more seamless. So all the speed ramps and the wipes all have their own individual whoosh. Don't forget that sound design is extremely important. So make sure you include it in a lot of your videos because it just adds that touch, that flair that we all need in a lot of our videos. And don't think that you're gonna find these sound effects easily. For example, if I go back to this shot right here, with the veggies being rolled, I actually used sound effects of luggage being rolled around, and all I did was muffle it, and that actually matched this clip. Because sometimes you're not going to find the same exact sound effect that you need for that specific object that you're shooting, so you might have to get a little bit creative there. And don't worry guys, I'm going to have a few more tutorials about this edit where I dive deep into the actual transitions and how I edit the sound design. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe with those notifications turned on, and I'll see you in the next video.